Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast is your one-stop shop for fantasy football news and advice. Can't decide on who to draft on the first round? Going gaga on how to line up your team. Got you covered. Traditional leagues, dynasty leagues, PPR leagues, IDP league, even daily fantasy football league. Join us as we break down all the questions of fantasy football. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast.
And welcome into the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast. My name is Anthony. Jeremiah is not here today. He will be back on Tuesday. So we're going to start off the NFL. They did what the NFL does. They like to put on a big spectacle because they are the NFL. They decided to release the NFL schedule. Right? Big old media spectacle. Everybody on ESPN, everybody else makes this big old thing. Dust off Mel Kiper, dust off Todd McShay, dust off everybody else that cares about football. Trey Wingo and the rest, Mark Schlereth. And okay, everybody, let's all talk about the NFL schedules. So I think that's kind of weird, just being honest, because it doesn't prove anything, right? Like, here's the thing. Like, I understand that the NFL schedule matters because it'll tell you more than an NBA schedule, because the NBA schedule play everybody. NFL, there's only 16 games. And there's more than 16 NFL teams, so obviously you're not going to play everybody, so it matters who you play. But when they start coming out with things like, oh, this player is at the top of, the draft or the top of the schedule because they have the easiest schedule. We have no idea what the easiest schedule is going to be. Yeah, we probably assume the Browns are going to be bad and the Bengals are going to be a decent team and the Jaguars are going to be a bad team. We probably assume those things, but outside of that, the Baltimore Ravens could be anywhere from 6-10 to 12-6. You have no idea what, or 12-4, I guess. Like, you have no idea what they're going to be. So to say that a team has the hardest schedule or the easiest schedule, that's really hard to pinpoint and narrow down for sure. Now, with that being said, that's not to say that nothing is important or relevant or whatever you want to say with the NFL draft. There are things that do matter. There are things that you can kind of take and look at and kind of look on going forward to see if it'll be beneficial or not. The first one we'll talk about is where the teams play. And not specifically as far as if they're going to stay at home or away. I'm talking about if they're staying in the country, right? And how exactly this matters, right, fantasy football-wise. So with certain teams, Jacksonville, for instance, they love to play in England. That's like their second home. That's like their summer home. They just go there every now and then. They just decide to play in front of fans who seem to love them. Maybe they don't know that the Jacksonville Jaguars are one of the worst teams in the NFL, but whatever. It's basically been their home team. So they're going to play in England again, right, for the God knows how many time in a row. But, good for them. They're going to play. So what does that mean? So you look at when they're going to play, right? Because if it's one thing, if it's in week 1, week 2, week 3, the time that they're actually going to play is they're going to play against Baltimore on September 24th. So pretty much early on in the season, right? So I think that part in itself isn't that big of a deal, right? I think then you're still going to have very good production out of everybody on the team. Moving on a little bit in a different direction, you get the Oakland Raiders. And they're going to play in Mexico City. And it's going to be against the New England Patriots. And it's going to be November 19th. So this is going to be like weeks and weeks and weeks into the season, right? This isn't going to be something that all of a sudden the Oakland Raiders, first couple of weeks of the season, it's going to be fine. They're going to be able to, go past this, doesn't matter. This is going to be a game where if you look at it, because think about last year, right? You remember what happened last year with the Raiders when they went to Oakland? Like, it was a very close game, right? It was a game that you didn't really think was going to be that close of a game because they were playing the Houston Texans, right? And you figured, oh, they're going to blow out the Texans because at that time you didn't really expect that much out of the Texans, right? But it was a lot closer of a game. They had the thing where whether it was inbounds or out of bounds, you didn't really exactly know for sure. Replay said this or that, but they beat them 27-20. Now this year, like I said, the Oakland Raiders are going to play the New England Patriots, right? They're going to be playing the best team in the NFL probably because considering what the Patriots added in the offseason, you're going to be playing the New England Patriots in a time when people start to get banged up a little bit, right? Because by that time when they're going to overplay them, it's going to be week 11. It's right after a bye week, so that part of it's nice. But at the same time, you're going to be playing the New England Patriots, quote unquote, at home in a game that, people are already kind of banged up. You're going on the road because I don't care if they call it a home game. It's a road game. And you're doing something where it's foreign to you. Like, I understand they played last year, but they didn't play like how you would hope they would. So looking at this kind of from a fantasy football perspective, you say, okay, well, let's take last year because you always want to have something that's kind of like a reference point, right? If you want to say, like, okay, well, they played in Mexico last year, and how did that work out? Okay, well, like I said, they won 27-20. Same thing, week 11 after a bye. So at least they're consistent with all of these things, right? They're kind of trying to keep it somewhat the same. They're trying to make sure you kind of have the same kind of, week beforehand to prepare and everything else. But you look at the team. Derek Carr, pretty good. 295 yards, 3 touchdowns, 1 interception, but, very good game overall. And the problem comes with, like, Mari Cooper. He had a touchdown, but only 57 yards catching. The number one receiver was Jamizi Olawale. He had 90 receptions on 3 catches, 1 touchdown. Really good game. But it wasn't a game that you would expect from Amari Cooper, right? Even the running situation, Latavius Murray, who, by the way, is now gone, had 33 yards rushing. So kind of a weird game, and you also allowed 243 yards from Brock Osweiler. Not terrible, but also Osweiler. Like, you don't expect much from him anyways. You gave 100 yards to Lamar Miller. So trying to figure out fantasy football-wise how this works out. It's something where I think you should expect about the same amount of production because you do give them the bye, right? You do give them a bye beforehand, and that helps out. That's something where you can all of a sudden start to expect them to be a little bit more fresh, but at the same time, it's still week 11, so you're probably going to have people who are banged up, and I would expect a good game from Derek Carr. This is all assuming that he comes back healthy and everything's good with his leg in the offseason. But you look at something like that, right? And you look at the Jacksonville Jaguars. I think you can expect a little bit more from the Jacksonville Jaguars than you can from the Oakland Raiders because at this point, the Jaguars know what to expect. Blake Bortles still going to be the quarterback. He's been the quarterback the entire time they've been going to England. So I would expect a good game from them. But for the Oakland Raiders, I expected a little bit of, a little bit of a hiccup every now and then when they're playing. But with that being said, the Raiders are playing the Patriots and the Jaguars are playing the Ravens. I expect more from the Jaguars than I do from the Raiders, as weird as that actually sounds. A couple of the games are going to be played in England. Miami's going to be playing against the New Orleans Saints, quote-unquote Miami's home game. You're also going to have a situation where the Rams are going to host the Cardinals, and you're going to have Minnesota against Cleveland. You're going to have all of these kind of situations. I don't really understand why the Rams are going to England, hosting, I should say, the England game, because it's not St. Louis anymore, where it was at least halfway around the country. It's Los Angeles. Like, why are you going from Los Angeles and going to play in England? Like, that game alone, like, I understand they're playing the Cardinals, which is also kind of West Coast team too, so I guess they're both West Coast teams, but I would not expect good things at all from the Rams. Like, I expect the Rams to get their face caved in that game. Fantasy football-wise, come on now. Name me a player on the Rams that you have any kind of expectations from. Jared Goff was a disaster last year. Kenny Britt, I mean, fine. Like, he was a good enough player there last year, but he could be the looter in the riot thing where it's just like you have to get yards from somebody, right? That's what people kind of thought last year was for Terrell Pryor. But for Kenny Britt, like, he might be somebody that's going to get you some yards for the Rams, but there's also, no guarantee that he does that. He could all of a sudden be nothing. He could be someone that totally doesn't show up for you for the Browns, right? He could be with the Cleveland Browns when they're facing the Vikings. He could have a lot of yards. But I think with the Rams, I think the one thing that you have to kind of focus on more than anything else with the Rams is the fact that this year is going to be bad for them, and all these England games are going to be muddled, right? All these games are going to be kind of weird because, A, you're playing at a different time. So I think whether it's the Browns playing the Vikings, I think whether it's the Rams playing the Cardinals, whether the Dolphins playing the Saints, or whether the Jaguars are playing the Ravens, I think all of them are going to be sloppy games. They're all going to be bad games to where you don't necessarily see what you hoped you would see. It's earlier on in the day. It's in a foreign country, and you're doing it at different times of the year. And as much as the NFL wants to like give them kind of like a bye around the time, or they want to say, oh, this is, good for the NFL because it boosts, the fans and everything else, these games are going to be bad, man. So if you have anybody that you care about starting in any of these games, I would not want to start them. I would sit basically your mid-starters. Like, don't get me wrong. Like, if you have somebody like a Drew Brees and he's playing, fine, start him, obviously. But if it's anybody that's kind of like a, Jarvis Landry for the Dolphins, I wouldn't do that. That's really dicey. With that being said, we're going to take our first break here at the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast. We will be right back. Stay tuned.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
And welcome back to the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast. All right, so we're going to dive a little bit deeper into the NFL schedule and looking at certain things, right? Like I said, you have no idea if the team's going to go 12-4 and 4-12. You really don't. But with that being said, there are a few more matchups that you look at and you're like, oh, okay, cool, this is going to be interesting. This is going to be juicy. One of them, the Washington R's are going to be playing the New York Giants. First off in Week 12 in Washington, then Week 17 in New York. And I say that for one reason and one reason only. You get Odell Beckham and you get Josh Norman. You get two people that clearly don't like each other. Like I heard an interview that what's his name, Josh Morgan was doing on Dan Le Batard's show, and he was saying that when he was in Carolina, he didn't necessarily like the Saints or didn't like the Falcons or the Bucks or whatever, but it wasn't like some like hostile thing. It wasn't something where you all of a sudden just had this like venom for the team, right? Like, yeah, you didn't like him, but it wasn't anything mean. He said once he got to the NFC East, it was all of a sudden a lot more bile. It was a lot more something where you rooted viciously against New York or Philadelphia or Washington, like or New York. Like you did these things where it's like you took it personally. Like the fans took it personally, kind of like how fans take it personally with like New York and Boston, right? For the like Yankees, Red Sox, or Duke and North Carolina in college basketball. He said like once you got there, that was something that all of a sudden you really started to focus on and like realize that like, oh, okay, wow, no, this is actually a thing. And I say that because with this matchup, like we saw last year, right, when Odell Beckham was playing against Josh Norman, like it was like, I'm trying to describe the best, but like physical, obviously it was physical, but like it was something where they were just like totally going at each other in a way that was like way more personal than just like, hey, I'm wide receiver, you're a cornerback, we have to go against each other, let's go. Like, no, this was something where, you for sure like realized that there was more going on than just a simple, game of wide receiver and cornerback. Like these two guys have been kind of sniping back and forth at each other, and now all of a sudden you had the actual game where like Odell Beckham lost his mind, man. Like that was also the situation last year where, you didn't know what to do necessarily. Like, first game, Josh Norman lost, right? You can say that pretty definitively, right, in 2016. Because the first game, the Giants, they lost 29-27 to Washington, and Odell Beckham, while he had a great game, it wasn't enough, right? Like, he still had a bunch of yards. He still had a situation where you were impressed, right? Because if you just look at the box score, it was something where he was the guy. But at the same time, Josh Norman did just enough. Washington got the win, and you kind of go from there. And then it started to get really physical. Then it started to become something where you had to, like, actually talk to both guys and be like, hey, stop. Like, this isn't the thing anymore. Also, you had a situation during the year where Josh Norman wasn't having as much fun because he was shooting fake bow and arrows in the crowd and getting fined for it, a pretty hefty amount. So that game should be a lot of fun. I still would expect really big things from Odell Beckham because he basically is a top, 3 wide receiver in the NFL, and you basically start him whenever. But just for those few games, I would definitely take a look at that and, just keep your eye on that. Another situation is Christmas, right? Because we always have the situation where teams play on Thanksgiving. That's been a thing for a really long time now, and you've kind of made peace with that. Like, it's a national holiday. You're with your family, but, it's also football. Be it the Lions, be it the Cowboys, whoever. Like, people were playing on that day, and you understood it. Well, this year and last year, they've had the situation where you're playing on Christmas, right? In 2016, the schedule gets released. You start looking down the schedule, and you're like, oh, okay, cool. So Christmas is going to be on a Sunday. 2017, you look it down, okay, December 25th, what's going to be that? Oh, okay, cool. Again, you're going to have games on Christmas Eve. You're going to have games on Christmas Day. And I got to figure, like, the NFL as a whole is probably going to try and look into that, right? Because, I don't really understand the full reason why you would have these games when you have them, right? Because, like, while I do understand that, you want to have as much exposure, quote unquote, as possible, you're still having the situation where, why have these games on Christmas Day? Like, why have, like, enough of these games that you're going to have them, right? If you're going to have these games, fine. But at the same time, do you want to have this many games on Christmas and have it be something where, like, you're inconveniencing the players, right? And I understand the NFL probably doesn't care about the players at all. Like, on a scale of 1 to 10, it's probably like a -5 about how much they actually care about them. But having these games, basically taking them away from their families, right? Because that's essentially what you're doing, right? You're basically saying, like, okay, well, don't worry about Christmas, don't worry about Thanksgiving, all the big holidays that are in the middle of all this. Yeah, don't worry about that. You guys are fine. Don't worry about it. Just go play the game. And I got to think the next time they go through the, like, collective bargaining agreement and everything else like that they're going to look into that, right? Because, you have a couple of games on Saturday the 23rd, and you got a game on the 24th. And then on Christmas Day, you got the Raiders playing the Eagles, and you have the Steelers playing against the Texans, right? So you're going to have these games. It's not a full slate of games, but it's enough games to where you're just like, I don't really understand why the NFL would do this. There's a couple things I don't understand why the NFL would do, but this just seems like a strange thing for them to do, to actually have these games on Christmas. Like, just give them that Monday off. If it falls on a Sunday, it falls on a Saturday, it falls on a Monday, Thursday, whatever. Just be like, no, this is Christmas. We're going to let you guys have this holiday. Like, Thanksgiving, you've made peace with. Like, fine. But Christmas seems like a different kind of holiday where you kind of should let the players, let them live. Let them go home. Let them have the time with their families at least 1 week. And then you can extend it, like, another week into the season, right? You give every team another bye. Because you can do this, like, financially and fiscally, right? If you just say, like, we're not playing this week. We're giving you guys another week off, another week to rest, and then you get more advertising for the next week. You get more revenue, basically, because all of a sudden now it lasts a little bit longer. And, like, I think it could actually work. I think just the NFL is just kind of greedy and they don't think about it because they just release the schedule. And there's things where the schedule is, like, really lopsided in certain aspects. Like, you have a situation sometimes where the NFL decides that, the Raiders will travel, like, thousands upon thousands of more miles than a team like the Steelers, right? Because the Steelers, if you're playing them, they're all kind of, like, bundled up with, like, the Bengals and the Browns and the Ravens. They're all kind of, like, in that close enough area to where, like, the Raiders are all the way on the West Coast And if they have to play the Chiefs, that's 1,500 miles to play them. And if the Raiders are going to play in Mexico City, that's a lot of miles down there. If they're going to play the Jets, they got to go all the way down to New York. And they want to play the Dolphins all the way down to Miami. Like, there's these thousands and thousands of miles that the NFL doesn't care about, and you get a big discrepancy of literally thousands upon thousands of miles that differentiate between how far a team like Pittsburgh or Washington or Baltimore, teams that are in the Northeast that are all close to each other, and the difference in miles that they have compared to a team like the Raiders or the Chargers or the Rams, people that are playing on the West Coast. But the NFL, I guess, has a few things to work on. With that being said, we're going to take our next break. When we come back, we're going to talk about Reuben Foster. Who's Reuben Foster, you might ask? Well, Reuben Foster is the Alabama linebacker who, didn't necessarily have to do much in the combine, but still managed to find himself in just a tiny little bit of hot water because he might have failed a drug test, at least, diluted urine sample, which they're going to take as positive. So when we get back from the break, I'll talk about how that whole thing basically works out, what it means for him, whether positive or negative, how it affects his draft stock. When we get back, we'll talk about how Reuben Foster, how he's going to relay. We can talk about the actual mechanics about how the NFL combine actually works out as far as drug testing. We're going to talk about all the stuff that will affect him fantasy football-wise with his team, whether or not the teams are going to be more hesitant to draft him now, whether it's going to affect his money. We're going to basically get into a giant discussion about basically once you go into the NFL draft, the process that you have to do in order to basically make teams happy to draft you, right? Because this is a giant meat production, basically like a meat plant that you're basically like showing off to people. So with that being said, when we get back, we're going to talk about Reuben Foster and whether or not what he did is the worst thing in the world for him, or if it's something that actually, in a little bit of way, was kind of smart. May not understand exactly what I'm talking about but we'll talk about that a little bit more once we get back from the break. Stay right here. You're listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast.
Do you want to be healthier, yet you just don't know what to do? All these shows telling you this and that, but nothing seems to work. Well, listen close. Golden State Media Concepts has got something great for you. The Health and Wellness Podcast dedicated to workout trends, healthy eating habits, diet, and everything about healthy living. Join us in our banters as we help you not just live life to the fullest, but live it to the healthiest.
And welcome back to the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast. My name is Anthony. Jeremiah is going to be out until Tuesday. So we're going to talk about Reuben Foster. Reuben Foster is a linebacker out of the University of Alabama, kind of one of those C.J. Mosley types where, you obviously are going to have him as a high draft pick because Alabama is the closest thing that college football has to a pro-style defense. And he was the number one guy there, kind of along the DJ Hightower kind of mold. He was going to be a top 10 pick, maybe top 5, but top 10 pick, right? He's going to be really high pick in the draft. Well, turns out he got popped for a diluted drug sample, right? Diluted urine test, and they take that as basically a positive test, right? If it's not all the way good, you failed it, which makes sense. Now, he's saying that he basically had some messed up dehydration situation where he had to take a bunch of water, a bunch of fluids, everything else like that, and that messed it up. Did that happen? Maybe. It's possible that it happened, but it's also possible that you just took a couple things and you got caught. Now, you're going to hear a lot about this shows character issues and this shows that he's not totally focused on football. Fine. That's going to happen, and I can't really argue with any of that. But here's the one thing when it comes to that. I don't care so much that you failed a drug test, right? But depending on what it is. If it's like anabolic steroids, then fine. Don't do that because you're in a game that literally has people colliding with each other. That part I get you shouldn't do. If it's marijuana, I don't care as much that you took the marijuana. That's not the part that would worry me if I was a fan of whatever team he got drafted to. The part that would kind of make me look sideways is the fact that you knew when this was coming, right? This isn't something that's a surprise to you. This isn't something that you got sprung on you at the last minute. Like, this is something that teams tell you all the time. Like, hey, when you come here, you're going to do certain tests. You're going to do certain agility stuff. Like, you're going to do like the 40. You're going to do a bench press. You're going to do a shuttle drill. You're going to do all these things. Also, you are going to get drug tested. And for somebody to fail it, like, that basically says like one of two things. Either A, you don't care about it and you're just like, whatever, I'm going to smoke weed every day and I don't care about it, which does lend itself to the character issues that people like to talk about. Or you have the situation where you either don't care or you have a problem. And both of those things would scare me if he goes to, let's say, the New Orleans Saints at 11, right? Because New Orleans Saints have a bad defense and you need all the help you can get. But also, you don't want a guy that's either someone that doesn't care about it, a la kind of like a Josh Gordon, right? Remember Josh Gordon, the dude that was really, really good in Cleveland, who couldn't basically stop smoking weed and had enough of a problem where he keeps getting suspended for it and ended up going to rehab a few months back because of it. Also something like a Justin Blackmon. Justin Blackmon basically couldn't curb his drinking problems, and he had DUI after DUI after DUI, and eventually he's basically now not in the NFL because of it, even though he's a very talented player. Now, is that what Reuben Foster is? Probably not. Like, you're taking a big leap from saying one to the other. But the reason why I would say it would worry me is, like I said, he is somebody that you know when these things are coming, right? They tell you, like, hey, this is going to be coming. Make sure you don't smoke weed from this state to this state, and you still mess it up. Like, they don't care so much if you get popped for marijuana. You know, they don't care about necessarily stopping you from smoking. They just want you from, like, making the league look embarrassed, right? Like, will you not embarrass somebody? Like, if you won't embarrass a franchise, they can deal with a lot of stuff. You know what I mean? Like, the Cowboys took Greg Hardy after everything he did, and all they said was basically, don't embarrass us. And then he gets in the press conference, you know, talking about, you know, doing guns blazing and basically not showing any remorse for what he did. That's when the Cowboys were like, all right, man, like, you got to go. Like, if you can play through and do stuff that's good after controversy and you seem contrite, no one cares. Thing with this is with Foster is this shows that it's just like, you really couldn't pass this because now he failed the drug test. Cool. Like, you can't do anything about it at this point. But the problem is now with the NFL, you basically have your drug tests. And once you have your allotted amount of drug tests that you can have, it's over. Like, once you have your last drug test, totally go listen to Afro Man, you know, go listen to Sublime, smoke 2 joints, go listen to Bob Marley, go listen to Snoop Dogg, go listen to Willie Nelson, go listen to whoever you want. Do whatever you want to do, get high as Wiz Khalifa, it doesn't matter. But now with Foster, he's going to have to be somebody that gets tested multiple times because he's already in the drug program, which is kind of a weird thing because he's not even in the NFL yet, but he's already getting like NFL-type punishments. And he's now in the drug program, which means you don't get that like 1 or 2 tests. You get like 5, 6, 7, 8 tests, right? They don't trust you now. It's basically your parents basically going over you and saying, I'm going to leave you home for the weekend. Do not have a party. And then you throw a party, and then they come home, and they're like, cool, now we're not letting you alone by yourself because we can't trust you. Now the NFL's like, we told you not to do this. You did it. Now we're basically going to like keep watching you to make sure that you don't do this. And if you keep doing it, we're going to suspend you, and we're going to do more and more and more and more. And then from there, it's basically going to be a situation where if you do it enough times, kicked out of the league. Like, all this does for him right now, all this basically does is it embarrasses him, right? Because allegedly he was also going through the combine basically pulling the whole do you know who I am card. Is that an ego? Yeah. Is something that's like something the team should be like, oh, well, that shows bad character. I mean, no. Like, Deion Sanders famously said, I'm going to have so much money owed to me, they're going to have to put me on layaway. Like, that's as cocky as anything you're ever going to hear in your life. But he's Deion Sanders, and he could back it up. If Reuben Foster can come in, get drafted a little bit later, but have a Pro Bowl NFL career, no one cares. Randy Moss had the, like, marijuana concerns. How'd he do? Warren Sapp had concerns. How'd he do? Like, you can get past this very easily. It's just the fact of you just need to understand that now you're not going to get any benefits of the doubt. Now every time someone has a question about it, they're going to see, you know, if you can stay clean. And, you know, whether or not the NFL decides to, like, curb its stuff on medical marijuana or not, it's a totally different subject. But now, like I said, with Foster, he's in the program, right? He's somebody that now you have to look at and basically say, okay, you messed this up. You messed up the easy test. You messed up the take-home test, right? Like, your teacher ever give you, like, the take-home test where it's like they give you the stuff and it's like, okay, you take it home, you come back, you give us the answers. You better get 100% on that because you literally are given the whole day to look at the book. He was literally given the book and taken home, and he came back the next day, and they're just like, hey, so, where's, the test that we gave you? He's like, oh, I forgot to do that. Like, that's basically what he was doing. And, they're showing this weird thing on the TV right now. They're talking about the, like, brain stuff in CTE, and they're literally cutting into a brain. Like, that's weird, man. It's like, sorry, I didn't mean to, like, totally, like, take a left turn, but, like, that was just weird to see, like, a doctor basically, like, cutting into someone's, that's weird. Anyways, but yeah, so back to Foster, like, he is somebody, that's kind of a weird turn you can take, but, like I said, he is now in the program, for better or for worse. He is going to be tested a lot, and now he's going to have to prove that he's not a dum-dum, because no one's saying he isn't talented, no one isn't saying, like, they're not saying that he's any kind of a bad person. He just did the dum-dum thing of, you're going to be tested here. Please don't smoke weed. God, why did you smoke weed? You idiot. Why? And now he's going to have to live with that. Is it a big deal? No. But it's something that, he's going to have to deal with now basically for the rest of his career to prove that he is not an addict. Basically, for lack of a better term, he's going to have to prove that he is not some sort of addict that has a legitimate problem with, be it medical marijuana, or alcohol, or any kind of substance abuse, because that's a giant cloud that everything is in. It's not just marijuana they're going to test him for. They're going to test him for everything, but now they're going to keep testing him over and over and over and over and over and over again. So hopefully this all works out for him. Hopefully it's just someone that had, like, a stupid moment, and it's not that big of a deal. Hopefully he can get past this and go to a team like the Saints, and once he's on the Saints, help them produce. It's something that, affects the fantasy football team in the sense of, he can help these, like, mid teams now, right? He can help a team like the Baltimore Ravens, who are always down to taking talented players. He can help out a team like the Philadelphia Eagles. He can help out a team like the New Orleans Saints, who really, really, really need a good defensive player because they kind of don't have any of them on the team. But with that being said, we're going to take our final break. My name is Anthony. You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast. You can listen to us on a variety of platforms, iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, stuff like that. SoundCloud. You can also find us on Facebook at facebook.com at GSMCF Football, Twitter at GSMCF Football. We do this twice a week on Tuesday and on Friday. My name is Anthony. Like I said, Jeremiah will be back next Tuesday. Have a good weekend, guys, and we will talk to you next week. Goodbye.